In these videos, I'm going to use iZotope Ozone 7 and in particular the new vintage modules it contains to master a track by the artist Debucus and hopefully show you what you can bring to your mastering using these newly added devices. So I'm here with my track from Debucus. It's called Dream Travel. It's been kindly supplied to me to use as a demonstration platform for going through some of these new modules in Ozone 7. Now I've actually mastered the track. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the modules one by one, and as I go through them, talk about what I've done, talk about what they can do, and the kind of things that they could bring to your tracks if you start using Ozone 7 for mastering purposes. The vintage devices are very much a focus of the new features of Ozone 7. And right at the start of my chain, I've got the vintage tape module. And the idea behind this module is to emulate the characteristics that you would get from using an analog tape machine as your mixdown format. So at the moment, we tend to bounce onto disc. We do everything digitally, but if you go way back, pretty much everybody, when you'd finish the mix, you would have to mix it down onto analog tape of one format or another. 1/4 inch was quite common, 1/2 inch was ideal, that sounded much better. Now if we turn this on, straight away as soon as I turn it on, you can probably hear it gets quite a bit warmer in the bottom end. I'll just turn it off again. And then back on. So iZotope say that if you drop this in at the start of your chain and you don't change any of the settings, it should be giving you a bit of the characteristics of an analog mastering deck. I've actually left the input drive here as standard. I don't want to drive it any harder. For rock music and some other types of dance music, I'm thinking drum and bass, that kind of thing, something that's not quite so transient heavy. Driving it a bit harder here may be good. It gives you a little bit of distortion, but we're talking about good analog pleasant distortion. I'm going to leave that at default here because this track, most of Debucus' stuff is done with hardware. So it's already got a little bit of that harmonic distortion in the mix already from being mixed on an analog desk. The bias here, this is emulating the bias on a tape machine, and essentially if you go negative on the bias, it emphasizes the high frequencies, and if you go positive, it emphasizes the low frequencies. So just to demonstrate, so if I go all the way down there, it's emphasizing those high frequencies a bit. If I go all the way to the top, so you can hear that's much warmer there. And I found that this kind of area here, this was sounding quite sweet, just giving a little bit of sparkle. The speed here is simulating the speed of the tape machine. Some of the controls here, the frequencies that are being affected will be changed if you change the speed of the tape machine. I'm leaving it at 30 IPS, 30 inches per second. That's really the optimum speed you would use if you use an analog tape machine. It means you get the best fidelity and the least noise. The harmonics here, this adds even order harmonics to the distortion if you drive the input at the start. This already sounds a little bit driven because of the analog nature of it, so I've just added a tiny little touch there, but it's very, very subtle. Now, the low emphasis and the high emphasis, these are essentially very broad and very musical EQs, and they seem to work really, really well. I've actually boosted a bit of both. If you take a look at the little diagrams next to each slider, you can actually see the areas and the shape that it's going to affect. So if you look at the top there on the low emphasis, you can see it gives us quite a pronounced low end bump, but it follows it with a bit of a cut in the low mids. And really that kind of boost usually I find is quite musical. And down towards the bottom, it's just leaving that gentle roll off on the really low frequency. So I've boosted that a tiny little bit. You can actually hear if I push this up, so it's capable of quite a lot of boosting, but it's very musical, it's very nice. Now the high emphasis is a similar kind of deal. You can see here that without it pushed up, it's going to be gently rolling off in a kind of S curve at the top, but if we go to the other end, it's going to be pushing it up. It's going to be that positive S curve. So can just hear it subtly changing that there. I think I want to reset this. Because I'm actually listening to it now. I think I want a bit more. Yeah, so let's A-B. Yeah, that's really nice. It's funny that most of the effect there seems to be in the top end. It's really made a big difference. So let's just go back to the start of the track. And let's take a look at the next module. Now, this isn't one of the new modules. This is the Imager, which has been the same in Ozone 6 and 7. But this is very important. If I turn it on, you can see here what I've done is I've taken the lowest band and reduced the stereo width completely, so it's mono. These symbols here are telling us that at this end of the slider, it's going to be mono. At this end, it's going to be artificially pushing it out into stereo. As I'm sure you know, low frequencies, especially in dance music, really need to be kept in mono because it can cause huge problems, especially when it gets played on a club system. Lots of people hear music in mono in the club. There's a huge litany of problems you can get if your real low frequencies are actually pushed out in stereo. Essentially, what you need to remember is that low frequencies aren't directional. It's very difficult to represent low frequencies in stereo. So, as a safety measure, I always tend to do this with a track like this. I've reduced the low mid band a touch, and then the high mid and the highs I've pushed out a little bit wider. So at this stage in the track, it's actually not very wide. We can see from our vector scope here, that electric piano's come on, that's got quite a lot of stereo effect on it, so it's starting to move a bit more. But if we go back to where it's mainly just the beat and the keyboards, it's only really the keyboards that are giving it much width at all there. Now, if we take a look at our bands, you can see these are the points at which I've set my crossovers. If we listen to this one, so that's just real thumping bottom end, all the way up to about 200 Hertz. So essentially everything up to 200 Hertz is mono. All of this stuff from 200 Hertz up to 1.87K is reduced a fair bit into mono. And then our high mids, and then our high frequencies, real, very fizzy stuff up there. It actually makes quite a big difference because some of those keyboard chords have quite a lot of bottom end on them. It's surprising how much that bottom end gets pushed out into stereo. So for me, this is a lot better. This has got a lot more focus. We can A-B everything. So even with just the first two modules in play, it's already made a big difference. Now, there's a little bit of a volume jump there when I bypass. If I hit the ear here, so with this ear button turned on, what we're going to hear is everything at pretty much the same level. Now that's why we saw some clipping there, but it's only temporary. Basically, I turn this on if I want to hear what Ozone is doing, and then I want to hear the track bypass, but I want to hear both of those things at pretty much the same level. Remember that most of the stuff we do in mastering, there is a potential for us to be adding level, and where possible, I try not to add too much. But this is a really useful tool to actually hear what your mastering is doing, rather than just hearing, oh, that's louder, so it sounds better. So in the next video, I'm going to move on to the next two modules in my chain, the vintage compressor and the vintage EQ.